So today we're going to talk with Ms. Dr. Baharian, talking about the factors that contribute to teen suicide. It's Dr. Baharian.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, thank you.
So my name is Dr. Pari Baharian, and I actually work a lot with varying ages of individuals who present with suicidality. Suicidality basically includes ideation, which is thinking about suicide. It includes attempts. It includes everything, attempts and completion. So I work a lot with teens that are experiencing suicidality as well as adults of different ages. So I'd like to help the best I can.
Thank you. Okay, so to start off, I would like to ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
So as a psychologist, what situations or what common situations do you see as a psychologist?
Sure. So especially in regard to teens, would you say? Okay. So with teens, the number one thing I see is some type of relationship problem, whether it be a romantic relationship, which those are like very intense situations when people come in. Maybe they're going, excuse me, through a breakup, or maybe they've been rejected by someone. Maybe they're being bullied by people. Maybe their family relationships are in trouble. Mm-hmm. Some type of relationship is the biggest thing that I see for teens, because relationships are so important, right? I mean, especially for teens and for adults, but especially when you're first experimenting with relationships, it can be harder. So some type of relationship issue, as well as isolated teens, those that are being bullied, and they don't really have a lot of support. Maybe they feel different. They don't feel like they fit in. I see a lot of that as well. So those are the two main things I think that I see.
Okay, thank you. What would you say is generally a major factor in suicide?
Okay, so there's a lot of different factors, of course, but the biggest thing across the board for all ages as well is this hopelessness and thinking that nothing is going to get better no matter what you do. Okay, so that would mean, even though you were going through a breakup, you think it's never going to get better. You're just always going to feel this level of psychological pain, and so you need to do something to end your pain. Okay, so that's a really big thing that is a big factor that contributes to it, is hopelessness. There's also feeling like a burden on other people. So if you feel like you have so many problems and you just need so much attention and you need assistance, then you're like, maybe I feel bad that I have to turn to people all the time. Maybe I'm too much for them. Okay. And like I was saying before, the feeling isolated and not feeling connected. Those are the top three emotional things that come in. Now, there of course are different populations and things like that are at higher risk. Being LGBT, that's not a risk factor in and of itself, okay? Yeah. However, there are risk factors associated with being LGBT, and one of the biggest things is lack of family support, and for their if they've come out already and they've had a bad experience, or maybe they're afraid to come out because their parents have said negative things about that population. So they are more likely, when they attempt suicide, to be disappointed that it didn't work. They actually will want to die more, okay? And let's see. Definitely substance abuse, I would say. And because when you're under the influence of a substance, you have no impulse control, really. So that would be more likely to complete suicide, is when you're under the influence of whatever kind of drug or alcohol or anything like that. It can really take away your thinking ability, and you don't think about the severity or the seriousness or the lasting impact of death at that point. You just want to do something to end your pain. Okay. Sure.
So the next question is, how does their economic status have an impact on suicide?
I don't know there's necessarily a direct link, just in the cases that I've seen anyway. But because I think sometimes people that have a lower income actually a lot of times will have higher family relationships, closer family relationships, because all they have really is each other, and they don't have a lot of people around, or they don't have the people that are coming from a higher socioeconomic status often will have a lot of different distractions. They'll have a lot of different things going on. They might actually feel more disconnected sometimes. So it doesn't really, that's the only thing I can really think of, but in and of itself, I don't think. Of course, when you're lower income, there are risk factors that come along with that, like just risk factors of exposure to negative populations, or maybe risky populations, or maybe more exposure to drugs, and more exposure to drugs that are not, they're mixed with a lot of different things, maybe, and so death can happen by way of that as well. So not necessarily directly linked, but the factors that are associated with economic status, I think, can contribute.
Okay. So in what ways do any traumatic incidents from a teenager's childhood affect suicide attempts?
So the way that happens is when teens, or anybody that's gone through abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, any neglect, that contributes because you feel like the people that were supposed to take care of you hurt you instead. That really hurts. And also it raises your level of shame, and at the same time decreases your level of self-esteem. Okay, so those two factors, low self-esteem and a high level of shame, contribute very highly to suicide. Even, I think it's 50% more likely with this high level of shame, which is associated with child abuse or neglect or traumatic incidents from the past, because of the shame. That's what the research has shown. And you just don't feel like you're good enough, and maybe you should just not be on the planet. And of course, that's the mentality, and hopefully they seek help and support to explore that. Okay.
So why do some teenagers reach out for help and others keep suicide thoughts to themselves?
So there's a variety of different things here. I think some teens, if they feel like they have support, will reach out. But I don't know if you've experienced this, or if you've experienced anything with your peers at school or elsewhere, but suicide has a big stigma associated with it, and it's a very taboo topic. So a lot of people don't even want to say the word suicide. They want to say different things like that make it sound better. Now, when you say those things, the person that's suicidal thinks, well, I guess they can't handle it, right? Why would you tell someone that couldn't handle it? Because then you just feel worse about yourself. Then, some teens feel like either they're going to be judged or that people can't handle it, so they keep it to themselves. Also, the biggest thing is the people that commit suicide, and you've probably heard this in the news as well, with that 17-year-old that recently committed suicide, nobody knew he was seen as friendly, because the people that really want to commit suicide are not going to tell anybody. So it's going to happen. And they don't want to tell anyone because they don't want someone to stop them. Okay? Those are the people that are at very, very, very high risk. And usually the only way those people get saved is by someone catching them in the act of committing suicide. So, which is very sad. But that is much rarer, I would say, than the attempts. Suicide, and I think we might get to that later, but yes, talk forever about this.
Okay, so what are warning signs in teenagers?
Okay, so things like maybe they don't enjoy doing the things they used to do. Maybe you guys all like to go out to, I don't know, just kind of go hang out together, maybe see a movie or go shopping or something like that, and they're just kind of listless and dull and like just kind of down, just not really, either they don't want to go, which is something they usually like to do, or they go, but they're not acting like themselves. And they might say statements like, yeah, life is just too hard. Life's too hard right now. I can't deal with life. Everything's too overwhelming. Maybe they are withdrawn. That's very scary. That's a very scary sign. They kind of just checked out. Okay? Now, that's a good time because friends have all the power with teens. Yeah. Friends have the knowledge rather than the family a lot of the times. So in my experience, a lot of times teens will come to me because their friends have told the teens' parents, and which is very brave, and it's rare, but they're really worried, so they wanted to help their friend, and which it's a good thing that they did. And I know it's hard to talk to people's parents, but a lot of times by you doing that, you can end up maybe saving their life.
Okay. 4 out of 5 teenagers. I could edit this. So 4 out of 5 teenagers give warning signs. Do family and friends notice them and not realize it's a warning sign?
Sure. And now, could you tell me a little more about just warning signs in general, you mean? Or okay.
Like you say, like they kind of separate themselves, or they don't want to do certain things, or they don't act like themselves. Do they just like, oh, maybe he just had a bad day?
Right. They kind of say, oh, they're going through a phase. I guess he's a teenager. She's a teenager. That's what happens. They're moody. And they hear from their friends across the board, maybe parents I'm talking about, that, well, my daughter went through the same phase, and she's fine now, so don't worry too much. Just let her be. The best thing is to ignore it, because then if you pay attention to it, it might get worse, okay? And I'm sure there are times when teens are just being moody. Maybe that is a good approach. However, this is much more serious, and I think there's 2 reasons why parents don't pay attention. Either they really think it's not a big deal, or they don't know how to deal with it. And they don't know who to turn to, and they feel actually very embarrassed. And maybe they feel like a bad parent. Like, why is this happening? So they don't want to talk about it with anybody or talk about it with a teen, because that brings to light their own inadequacies and insecurities. So no one wants to feel bad at what they do, right? So that happens, and that might even be subconscious. Okay, they might not even be thinking about that, but it can happen. And so basically, I think that's why sometimes teens can be ignored, even though they're exhibiting warning signs and crying out for help. Okay.
What makes males have a higher suicide completion than females who have made more attempts?
Sure. So, definitely males have a much higher risk of completing suicide. And females have a much higher rate of attempting suicide. So, basically, males use much more lethal means of completing suicide, which means something like using a gun, or something like running out to the middle of the street, or really things that are definitely hanging. I mean, things that are much more lethal, whereas females are more likely to try an overdose on pills, or try different things that are less lethal. So they're less effective at completing suicide, which is great. But males, that's why the rates are so much higher. It's not that the mental health issues are all that different. They're both in so much pain that they're trying to use suicide as one way to end their pain. Okay, but just males usually use more violent, lethal means than females.
Okay. How do teenagers who come to you for help react?
I guess there's varying ways. I've had teenagers call me themselves and come into treatment because they don't want anyone else to know. And if that's going to keep them alive, then I won't necessarily need to tell anybody until I need to tell someone, which is when I know they won't be safe. Okay, so I tell teens that not all therapists or treatment providers are maybe comfortable dealing with suicide, and just because that person is not comfortable dealing with suicide, that does not mean that others won't be. So you want to find the right person. Okay, so so basically sometimes they don't trust me, I guess, when they come in the door, because great, they're either going to call 911, I'm going to get hospitalized right away, or they're going to tell my parents and I'm going to get in trouble, or they're going to pull away from me for a variety of reasons, maybe religious reasons, maybe family reasons, maybe it's embarrassment to the family, cultural reasons. There's so many different reasons it could be. They don't want me to tell their parents. And so I tell parents that you will know if you need to know, and I will tell. If they're not safe, then I gotta tell the parents. But there's a whole series of steps that leads up to that point, so that way they can feel more comfortable sharing it with me. It takes a little while sometimes, but I try to build the trust as best I can. I see it as a team approach, and that seems to help. People that say, just get over it, or things like that, they're expecting me to say that almost. But I'm like, okay, so suicide's one way to end your pain, but there's so many other ways to help you that aren't going to end in you losing your life. So that's what I try to help them with.
Okay. Do teenagers who have less access to guns or pills use alternative methods, or does this just generally decrease the suicide attempts or committing suicide?
Completing suicide, or can you just ask that question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. So, do teenagers who have less access to guns or pills use alternative methods, or does this decrease the rate of committing suicide?
So access to lethal means is one of the highest ways to complete suicide. Now, again, people that really want to commit suicide will find a way, unfortunately. Bridges, for instance, they'll go and they'll plan that. I mean, that's the unfortunate piece of it. And the very sad piece of it is that if they will find a way, but it probably does decrease their chances. I'm talking about the truly suicidal, the ones that want to complete suicide, which are much more rare, I would say, in teens. I say a lot of times teens will try to end their life because they are trying to cry out for help, which is good. That means that they want to live.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but the ones that really don't want to live, they'll find a way. But I think it does decrease the chances for those that aren't that rare population. Does that make sense? It makes it less easy. The easier it is to do it, the higher the chance it is.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So only 15% of teenagers who committed suicide were in treatment at their time of death.
Okay.
Why are teenagers still committing suicide?
So, meaning that, can you describe that question for me a little more?
Yeah, so it said only 15% of teenagers who committed suicide were in treatment at their time of death.
Okay.
So when they decided to kill themselves, they were getting treatment at the time.
Okay. So you're asking why are teens that were in treatment still committing suicide?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I think that actually links back to what I was saying earlier, that some treatment providers, and they are out there, I'm sure they're wonderful at other types of treatment, but sometimes they don't know what to do when a suicidal teen walks in the door. So either A, in the intake, they do not ask about suicide, which is the number one, that's a terrible thing to do. And sometimes they just don't think about it because they don't want to talk about it. They have a problem saying the word suicide because we're all different people. We all have different personalities, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes a teen will walk through the door and they don't know that's their problem. So even though they're not equipped to handle it, maybe they would have referred to someone else that was better to handle it if they knew. But sometimes they don't know. So basically when they come in the door, they might ask about it. You're not thinking of killing yourself, are you? Or something along those lines that seems like, why would you ever? You obviously think they're not going to be able to handle this. They're not going to know what's going on. So you're like, no, I'm good. Everything's fine. Okay. So a lot of times I think either A, the treatment provider does not know about the suicide, or they assess for the suicide one time and never came back to it. It should be an ongoing process. Okay. So each session, or every couple of sessions, if they say no in the beginning, mm-hmm. If they have something hard that's happened to them, you got to reassess and ask about it again. Or if they have said sometimes they think about killing themselves, and you work with them, and then maybe they say, I'm feeling better now. Maybe they will feel better for a while, but that doesn't mean you stop asking about it. It might even seem annoying, and the teen might even be like, oh my God, are you seriously going to ask me about this again? But it really does prevent a lot of, I think, suicides, because a lot of times teens aren't going to bring it up. So you have to ask them. So I think that's a big reason why my hypothesis would be why even those teens that are in treatment end up dying. So.
Okay. What makes cultural variations for suicide higher than others? So,
I think the Native American teens have the highest risk, actually, and then Caucasians. So, and then actually Hispanics or Latina, and then African Americans. They actually have somewhat lower risk of completing suicide. So, the Native American population, I think a lot of times teens will feel isolated or left out. They might feel different. They might have a long history in their mind of discrimination, and they do have a long history, and so their families aren't the best necessarily to turn to. They feel hopeless. I think the hopelessness piece adds to it. And then sometimes if people are being discriminated against, it's really tough to turn to other people because you don't know where you're going to get bullied next. So, any type of population that gets discriminated against more, I would say those factors have more to do with it than their ethnicity alone. So maybe their ethnicity alone doesn't contribute to it, but they're being like continuously made fun of or bullied or, just really victimized, then that I think contributes because it lowers the self-esteem, increases the shame. Same thing with you're going through child abuse. So those are the factors that contribute to it as opposed to just the ethnicity, except that one statistic that I said about Native American teens, that being the highest. Okay.
Okay.
And then just to get back to the LGBT youth, they are twice as likely to attempt suicide. Okay. Now let's make a distinction because we don't know. Death certificates do not include sexual orientation. Okay. So we actually don't know about the completed suicides for LGBT youth or adults. They don't include their sexual orientation. So we only know that they're twice as likely to attempt suicide. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Anything else you wanted to ask?
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the end of our interview. So thank you very much for doing this interview with me.
Of course, it was a pleasure.